The sound was not loud. It did not shatter planets, nor did it tear the fabric of the universe in the way a clash of gods usually does. It was sickeningly quiet, a wet, dense thud that echoed only in the soul, not the ears. On the verdant grounds of Beerus planet, time seemed to strangle itself. The grass, usually swaying in the gentle divine wind, stood paralyzed. Dust motes hung suspended in the violet air. Whis, the angel, the untouchable guide, the being who existed in a state of perpetual, perfect reflex, stood motionless. His eyes, usually narrowing in amusement or widening in feigned surprise, were blown wide open in genuine, incomprehensible shock. He looked down. There, buried deep within his chest, vibrating with a frequency that turned the surrounding light into blood-red static, was a fist. Vegeta's fist. But this was not the Vegeta who chased Kakarot. This was not the prince who sought redemption. The key flaring around him was not the serene blue of the gods, nor the violet of destruction. It was a jagged, corrupt, crimson, a color that looked like a wound in reality itself. The God Killer energy screamed, devouring the angel's holy light. Beerus dropped his slice of pizza. It hit the ground, the only movement in a frozen world. The god of destruction's jaw went slack, his feline pupils shrinking to pinpricks of absolute primal terror. For the first time in millions of years, the destroyer was the one trembling. Vegeta twisted his hand. Whis coughed, a spray of glowing, silver blood painting the Saiyan's face. "You said," Vegeta whispered, his voice sounding like grinding tectonic plates. "You said there was a ceiling I could never break." Vegeta yanked his hand back. The angel collapsed. The hierarchy of the cosmos has been shattered. Before the Grand Priest descends, and the multiverse unravels into chaos, anchor your soul to this timeline. Subscribe and ignite the notification bell, so you do not miss the history that is being written in blood. Gravity on the world of the Destroyer was not merely a force of physics, it was a judgment. It pressed down with the weight of collapsed stars, seeking to flatten bone into dust and resolve into silence. For a normal being, standing here would be death. For Vegeta, it was simply Tuesday. But today, the gravity felt heavier. It felt personal. Vegeta hung suspended in the air, his chest heaving like a bellows, sweat vaporizing off his skin before it could even bead. His body was a map of exhaustion, muscles trembling, veins bulging against the obsidian undersuit, his very aura flickering like a dying candle in a gale. He was in his ultra-ego form, the violet flames of destruction dancing wildly around his brows, but the power felt hollow. He stared at his hands. They were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer, biological rejection of the power he was trying to hold. Is this it? The thought was a parasitic worm burrowing into the back of his mind. Is this the summit? For years, he had chased Kakarot. He had chased the shadow of the Super Saiyan God. He had chased the fluid, unreachable state of Ultra Instinct, only to diverge and forge his own path in the fires of Ultra Ego. He had told himself that destruction was his nature, that damage was fuel, that battle was the only truth. But lately, a cold realization had begun to settle in his gut, heavier than any gravity training room. It wasn't enough. Below him, sitting on the stump of a prehistoric tree, Beerus, the god of destruction, picked his teeth with a splinter of bone. The destroyer looked bored. That was the insult. That was the knife in the gut. Vegeta was pushing his mortal shell to the point of structural failure, threatening to tear his own spirit apart to harness the power of a destroyer, and the actual destroyer was bored. "You're leaking energy again," Beerus muttered, not even looking up. "It's sloppy. Ultra Ego requires total immersion in the act of destruction. You're thinking too much. You're thinking about limits." Vegeta grit his teeth, the sound like grinding stones. I am thinking, Vegeta rasped, his voice distorted by the divine ki, about how to bridge the gap. There is no bridge. A soft, melodious voice chimed in. Vegeta spun around. Whis descended from the sky, holding his staff with the casual grace of a man holding a walking stick on a Sunday stroll. The angel touched the ground without making a sound. Not a blade of grass bent, not a dust mote was disturbed. It was perfection. Sickening, effortless perfection. Vegeta dropped to the ground, the impact cratering the rock beneath his boots. He powered down, the violet hair fading back to his natural jet black, the exhaustion hitting him like a physical blow. He panted, staring at the angel. Whis smiled. It was that eternal, enigmatic smile, polite, benevolent, and utterly distant. You and Goku-san have progressed remarkably, Whis said, tapping the ground with his staff. But you are trying to fill a cup that has no bottom. You seek to match the gods by running faster, hitting harder, screaming louder. It is charming, in a rustic sort of way. Vegeta wiped blood from the corner of his lip. Charming, he spat. I am not here for your amusement, Angel. I am here to surpass you. The air went still. Even Beerus paused his grooming, one ear swiveling toward the conversation. Whis tilted his head, his white hair catching the light of the nebula above. Surpass me, he chuckled, a sound like wind chimes. Vegeta-san, you must understand the distinction. You train to become stronger. You train to survive. You fight because you have something to lose: your pride, your family, your universe. Whis took a step forward, and for a split second, the pressure he emitted was so immense that Vegeta's vision blurred. It wasn't malicious. It was simply the weight of an ocean compared to a drop of rain. I do not fight to survive, Whis said softly. I simply am. You are trying to climb a mountain, Vegeta. I am the sky above it. No matter how high you climb, you will never touch the sky. You will only run out of air. Vegeta stared at him. The words were not an attack. They were a statement of fact, delivered with the same emotional weight as a weather report. You will only run out of air. Something inside Vegeta, something ancient, primal, and incredibly proud, fractured. Is that so? Vegeta whispered, his hands clenching into fists so tight the knuckles turned white. You think divinity is your birthright. You think because you were born with a halo around your neck that you are untouchable. I do not think, Vegeta-san, Whis replied, turning his back to prepare the table for lunch. I know, it is the nature of reality. A sheep can train all its life. It can sharpen its horns and harden its hooves. But it will never become the shepherd. The metaphor hung in the air, toxic and suffocating. A sheep. Vegeta felt the blood rushing in his ears, drowning out the ambient hum of the planet. He wasn't a warrior to them. He wasn't a prince. He was livestock. A pet monkey allowed to wear the clothes of a god, performing tricks for food. The suppressed anger didn't explode outward. It imploded. It collapsed into a singularity within his chest, dense and dark. Spar with me, Vegeta demanded. His voice was terrifyingly calm. Whis paused, a floating teacup hovering near his hand. He looked back over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing slightly. Vegeta-san, you are exhausted. Your ki is depleted. Another session would be pointless. Spar with me. Beerus looked at Vegeta, his eyes narrowing. He sensed the shift. This wasn't the usual Saiyan stubbornness. This was something colder. Very well. Whis sighed, the teacup settling gently onto the saucer. If you insist on bruising your ego further, I suppose a light exercise before lunch will aid digestion. Whis beckoned with a single finger. Vegeta did not scream. He did not flare his aura. He simply vanished. The space where Whis had been standing collapsed inward, the air rushing to fill the vacuum left by Vegeta's movement. It was a strike faster than thought, a blow delivered before the synapses of a mortal brain could even fire the command. It was the culmination of decades of war, the apex of Saiyan biology. It hit nothing but after images. Vegeta skidded to a halt, his boots carving deep trenches into the indestructible stone of the arena. He didn't pause. He pivoted, his body moving on pure instinct, launching a barrage of kicks that turned the atmosphere into a pressurized thresher. The ground beneath them pulverized into fine sand, rising in a choking cloud. Inside the dust, the silhouette of the angel moved like smoke. Whis did not block, he did not parry. He simply wasn't there when the attacks arrived. He drifted between the molecules of Vegeta's violence, his staff held behind his back, his expression one of mild critique, too rigid. Whis hummed, his voice audible even over the sonic booms of Vegeta's fists. He leaned back, letting a ki-infused punch sail millimeters from his nose. "You are projecting your intent, Vegeta-san. You want to hit me so badly that the desire arrives before the fist. It makes you slow." "Shut up," Vegeta roared. The violet aura of Ultra Ego erupted, vaporizing the dust cloud. The Hakai energy, the power of pure destruction, coated his limbs. If he touched Whis now, even an angel would burn. Vegeta lunged, a comet of purple annihilation. He grabbed at the angel's sash. He swung for the throat. He aimed a sphere of destruction at the ground to force a movement. Whis sighed. With a motion too fast for the eye but agonizingly slow for the spirit, Whis tapped the bottom of his staff against Vegeta's forehead. Clack! The sound was small, absurdly comical, but the force halted Vegeta's momentum instantly. The kinetic energy of the prince's charge had nowhere to go. It rebounded back into his own body. Vegeta gasped, his eyes bulging as his own force winded him. He crumpled to his knees, retching, the violet aura sputtering out like a doused torch. Silence returned to the clearing. The birds began to sing again, indifferent to the violence. Whis stood over him, unblemished. Not a hair was out of place. He hadn't even dropped his smile. "You see," Whis said, looking down at the kneeling Saiyan, "this is the ceiling I spoke of. You wield the power of destruction, yes, but you wield it like a mortal holding a stolen gun. You mimic the gods, but you are limited by the biology that birthed you." Vegeta stared at the grass, his vision swimming. Sweat dripped from his nose, watering the alien soil. "You are a creature of limits, Vegeta-san." Whis continued, his voice taking on a tone of detached pity that was infinitely worse than mockery. "You are finite. We are infinite. You are trying to empty the ocean with a spoon. It is a noble effort, truly. But eventually, the spoon breaks. The spoon breaks." Something in Vegeta's mind clicked. It was the sound of a lock turning or perhaps a chain snapping. For years, he had believed that hard work could overcome anything. That was the Saiyan creed. If a wall exists, you smash it. If a god exists, you surpass him. But looking at Whis' pristine shoes, seeing the absolute insurmountable gap between them, Vegeta realized the game was rigged. The angels weren't just stronger. They were a different category of existence. They were the system admins of reality, and he was just a glitch trying to delete them. As long as he played by their rules using their ki, learning their techniques, seeking their approval, he would always be the sheep. He would always be the pet. Vegeta slowly stood up. His legs shook, but he locked his knees. He wiped the bile from his mouth. "Are we finished?" Whis asked, tilting his head. "Lunch is getting cold." "Yes," Vegeta said. His voice was hollow, flat, void of the usual fire. "We are finished." He didn't look at Beerus. He didn't look at Whis. He turned his back on them, walking away from the training ground, away from the food, away from the path he had walked for the last decade. "Where are you going?" Beerus called out, chewing on a drumstick. "We aren't done for the day." "I am," Vegeta replied, not breaking stride. He walked toward the dense, dark forests on the far side of the planet, the places where the divine light didn't reach. I have some thinking to do. Whis watched him go, a flicker of curiosity in his violet eyes. He seems discouraged, the angel noted. Hell, get over it, Beerus grunted, tossing a bone over his shoulder. He always does. He'll sulk for a few days, scream at a mountain, and come back begging for more punishment. It's what Saiyans do. But as Vegeta disappeared into the shadows of the tree line, the air around him didn't feel like sulking. It didn't feel like sadness. It felt like the drop in pressure before a hurricane. Vegeta walked until the voices of the gods faded. He walked until the light of the nebula was blocked by the canopy of twisted, ancient trees. He stopped in a clearing, bathed in shadow. He looked at his hands, hands that had failed to touch the divine. The spoon breaks. Vegeta whispered to the darkness. He clenched his fist, and for the first time, he didn't reach for his key. He reached for something else, something buried deep in the reptilian brain of his heritage, something that hated the light. Then I will not use a spoon, he hissed. I will use a knife. The far side of Beerus planet was a place where the manicured reality of the gods forgot to keep up appearances. Here, there were no neatly trimmed hedges or floating ornamental lakes. There were only roots thick as Titan's limbs, twisting into a suffocating canopy that blotted out the nebula-streaked sky. The air was humid, heavy with the scent of ancient loam and things that had died millions of years ago without permission. It was a place of primordial silence, a silence that did not soothe the soul but stalked it. Vegeta sat cross-legged on a moss-slicked boulder, the center of a perfect, self-imposed darkness. He was trying to meditate. He was trying to find the neutral state Whis harped on about the calm center of the storm, where thought moved without friction. He inhaled, seeking peace. A sheep can train all its life. Whis' voice, smooth and poisonous, echoed in the cavern of his skull. Vegeta exhaled, his breath catching. He tried again. Inhale, seek the void. You will never touch the sky. His left eye twitched. The calm water of his mind was not just rippling, it was boiling. Every time he tried to empty himself, the image of that damn teacup hovering effortlessly, mocking his exertion, filled the space. The memory of the staff tapping his forehead, a gesture so patronizing, it felt like a spiritual castration burned hotter than any energy blast. Neutrality, Vegeta sneered, his eyes snapping open in the dark. The sound of his own voice was jagged. Why should he be neutral? The universe wasn't neutral. Frieza hadn't been neutral. Cell hadn't been neutral. Buu was chaos incarnate. The gods themselves were not neutral. They were arrogant arbiters holding a boot to the neck of existence, demanding gratitude for not pressing down. He stood up, the movement sudden and violent. A wave of Hakai energy, violet and unstable, erupted from his skin, vaporizing a 50-foot radius of ancient jungle in a silent flash. Ash rained down around him like gray snow. It wasn't enough. The destruction felt borrowed. It was Beerus' power. It was a divine tool lent to a mortal hand, and as we said, the tool was faulty because the user was flawed. Limits. Vegeta hissed to the shadows. He paced the crater he had just created, his mind tearing at itself like a trapped animal. He had gone Super Saiyan. He had ascended. He had gone God. He had gone blue. He had evolved blue. He had tapped into Ultra Ego. Every step of the way, he was told it was the pinnacle, only to find another mountain looming behind it, with Kakarot usually standing on the peak, waving like an idiot. But this was different. This wasn't about Kakarot. This was about the ceiling. The glass ceiling that separated the created from the creators. If I play their game, I lose, Vegeta realized. The thought landing with the cold weight of a tombstone. Their key, their techniques, their rules. They own the board. He stopped pacing. He stood in the center of the ashes, closing his eyes again. But this time, he didn't reach up for enlightenment. He reached down. He sank his consciousness past the calm blue seas of God Ki. He dove past the churning, violet magma of destruction. He went deeper, into the genetic basement of the Saiyan psyche. He went to the place where the Uzaru screamed, the place made of blood and moonlight and unadulterated violence. But even that was too civilized, too recent. He pushed further, into the primordial dark of his own soul, searching for something older than reason. He was looking for the frequency of the universe before the Grand Priest imposed order upon it. He was looking for the chaos that existed before the first Hakai was ever spoken. It was agony. It felt like peeling back the layers of his own mind with rusted hooks. He was rejecting his training, rejecting his growth, actively devolving his spirit in search of a weapon that the gods had forgotten to forbid because they never imagined a mortal would be mad enough to touch it. Hours passed, or perhaps days. Time held no meaning in the dark. Vegeta stood statue still, sweat pooling at his feet, his breathing shallow. Then he found it. It wasn't a roaring fire. It was a whisper, a cold, reptilian hiss buried beneath the foundation of reality. It was a frequency of energy that felt unbelievably dense, viscous, and sickeningly wrong. It tasted like iron and old blood. It was the vibration of things that do not want to be ruled. Vegeta's heart hammered against his ribs. This energy, it didn't flow from the gods. It flowed against them. It was an antibody produced by a universe sick of being manicured. Hesitantly, terrified by his own audacity, Vegeta reached out with his spirit and touched the frequency. The reaction was instantaneous. His body seized. His back arched in a silent scream as the ancient energy surged into him, not like a river, but like a mudslide. It was corrosive. It didn't harmonize with his God Ki. It attacked it. Vegeta fell to his knees, his hands clawing into the ash. Inside his veins, a war began. The serene blue light of his divine training was being hunted, cornered, and devoured by a new, cancerous power. It was painful beyond measure, a cellular rewriting of his existence. He felt his mortality not as a weakness, but as a weapon, sharpening itself against the grindstone of the divine. He opened his mouth to vomit, but only a thick, black smoke emerged, smelling of ozone and sulfur. Yes, Vegeta thought, his mind fracturing under the pressure. The pain was validation. The wrongness of it was proof. This is not their power. This is mine. He grabbed onto the torrent of chaotic energy and pulled it deeper into his core, anchoring it to his very soul. He was drowning himself to learn how to breathe underwater. He was letting the Saiyan prince die, so something else could be born in the ashes. The transformation was grotesque. It was a molting. Vegeta writhed in the dirt, his muscles spasming as if something alive was moving beneath his skin. The God Ki, the precious divine energy he had spent years cultivating, was being aggressively displaced. It leaked out of his pores in wisps of pale blue mist, dissipating into the heavy air of the jungle. In its place, a heavy, crimson sludge began to pump through his meridians. It was Ki, technically, but so dense it distorted the light around him. It didn't glow. It absorbed. It pulled the shadows of the forest closer, wrapping Vegeta in a cocoon of supernatural twilight. Let it go. A voice in his head commanded, perhaps his own, perhaps the primal ancestor he had awakened. Let the god die. Vegeta screamed, the sound tearing his throat raw. He forced the new energy into every capillary, every cell. His heart rate slowed to a terrifying, thudding crawl, thump, 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 each beat striking with the force of a hydraulic press. His eyes snapped open. The whites were gone. The sclera had turned entirely black, a void of ink. Within that darkness, his irises burned with a malevolent, arterial red. He stood up. The movement was jerky, unnatural, like a marionette being pulled by unfamiliar strings. He looked at his hands. The gloves were stained with the black smoke that had poured from his mouth. His veins stood out against his skin, dark and ropey, pulsing with the red energy. He didn't feel faster. In fact, he felt heavier. He felt like he was wearing a suit of lead armor. But he also felt absolute. God Ki was water fluid, adaptable, serene. This energy was stone. It was stubborn. It was immovable. It didn't flow. It crashed. Vegeta tested the power. He didn't form a sphere or a beam. He simply condensed the energy around his fist. The air around his hand didn't just heat up. It screamed. The space-time coordinates around his knuckles began to fracture, tiny spiderwebs of black cracks appearing in reality itself. The God Killer. Vegeta rasped. His voice had changed. It was deeper, layered with a subharmonic growl that vibrated in the chest of anyone who heard it. He looked up through the canopy at the sliver of sky visible above. Somewhere, miles away, Whis was sipping tea. Somewhere, Beerus was napping. They were safe in their hierarchy, secure in their knowledge that the ceiling was unbreakable. Vegeta's lips curled into a smile that was entirely devoid of joy. It was a rictus of anticipation. He had found the knife. Now, he just needed to sharpen it. For the next 3 days, the jungle on the far side of the planet became a slaughterhouse of physics. Vegeta didn't practice martial arts. He practiced murder. He found the massive, diamond-hard trees that had stood for eons and punched them. He didn't use technique. He didn't use leverage. He used pure, hateful density. The trees didn't splinter. They disintegrated. The energy didn't push through them. It erased the molecular bonds holding them together. He found the ambient barriers of the planet, the subtle divine fields that protected Beerus' world from the vacuum of space, and he clawed at them. He learned to coat his fingers in the red static, tearing holes in the barriers until the cold vacuum of space hissed in, only to seal it shut again. He was learning to bypass defense. He was learning that durability was a lie told by people who hadn't been hit hard enough. But the cost was high. The new form was eating him alive. His skin was pale and feverish. His mind felt frayed, constantly bombarded by aggressive, intrusive thoughts of violence. The God Killer state was not a transformation he could sustain. It was a berserker drug, and he was overdosing on purpose. On the morning of the 4th day, the silence broke. Vegeta stood in the center of a desolate wasteland of his own making. The forest was gone for miles, reduced to gray dust. He was panting, the black veins on his neck throbbing. He sensed it, the familiar, high-pitched hum of Whis' staff, tapping against the ground miles away. The summons. It was lunchtime. It was training time. Vegeta straightened his back. He closed his eyes and suppressed the red glare, forcing his eyes back to their normal state. He pushed the heavy, crimson energy deep down into his gut, burying it under a thin, fragile layer of his remaining normal ki. He looked like Vegeta again, a tired, battered Vegeta, but Vegeta nonetheless. But inside, the bomb was armed. "Time to go," he whispered. He lifted off the ground. He didn't fly with the swift, elegant streak of blue. He tore through the air, leaving a sonic boom that sounded like a crack of thunder. He was returning to the temple. He was returning to the sheep pen. But this time, the wolf was already inside. Vegeta touched down on the manicured grass of the temple grounds. He did not land with grace. He landed like a dropped anvil. The impact sent a shudder through the soil that rattled the silverware on Beerus' table. The god of destruction paused, a slice of pepperoni pizza halfway to his mouth. He looked the Saiyan prince up and down. Vegeta looked wretched. His armor was scuffed. His skin was the color of old parchment, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of a sleepless, feverish madness. "You look terrible," Beerus noted, taking a bite of the pizza. I assume you're done throwing your tantrum in the woods? We have quotas to meet, Prince. The oracle fish predicts a uprising in the northern galaxy. Vegeta didn't answer. He stood perfectly still, his arms hanging loosely by his sides. He wasn't looking at Beerus. His gaze was fixed entirely on the angel, standing a few paces behind the destroyer. Whis was wiping a speck of dust from his staff. He paused, sensing the weight of Vegeta's stare. He turned, his face arranging itself into a mask of polite concern. "Welcome back, Vegeta-san," Whis said, his voice light and airy. "I trust your time in isolation was illuminating? You seem to have worked up quite the appetite for silence." "Spar," Vegeta said. The word came out as a grind, a heavy stone dragging across gravel. Whis sighed, a sound of theatrical exhaustion. "Again? Immediately? You are barely standing, Vegeta. Your ki feels thin, turbulent. If we fight now, you will simply collapse." "One exchange," Vegeta rasped. He took a step forward. The grass beneath his boot turned gray and withered instantly. Neither god noticed. "One exchange. If you put me down, I will return to my training. I will be the obedient student." Beerus chuckled, swallowing his food. "Has desperate, Whis. Just flick him on the forehead and let's get on with the day. His brooding is ruining the flavor of the cheese." Whis looked at Vegeta for a long moment. The angel's eyes, usually so perceptive, narrowed slightly. He sensed something odd, a distortion in the air, a background static that shouldn't be there, but he dismissed it. Saiyans were chaotic creatures. Their energy fluctuated with their emotions. "Very well," Whis agreed, spinning his staff effortlessly. "One exchange. But please, try to make it interesting this time." The angel drifted to the center of the arena. He stood with his feet together, one hand holding the staff, the other resting behind his back. The ultimate posture of arrogance, the stance that said, "I do not need to prepare for you." Vegeta walked to the opposing side. He did not take his usual fighting stance. He did not raise his fists. He crouched low, his fingers digging into the earth like talons. The wind died. The birds in the nearby trees fell silent, as if sensing a predator that the gods were too arrogant to see. "Ready when you are," Whis called out, smiling. Vegeta didn't scream. He didn't roar to summon his power. He simply released the lock he had placed on his gut. The air pressure in the arena dropped instantly. The sky above them, usually a bright, swirling nebula, seemed to dim, as if a filter of gray glass had been placed over the sun. Beerus stopped chewing. The hair on the back of his neck, the instinct that had kept him alive for millions of years, stood straight up. "Whis," Beerus muttered, dropping the pizza. "Wait." It was too late. Vegeta moved. It wasn't the movement of a martial artist. It was the launch of a projectile. The ground where Vegeta had been standing didn't just crack. It vanished, atomized by a sudden release of density. Vegeta was a blur of black and gray, closing the distance in a time frame that laughed at physics. But Whis was an angel. His body moved automatically. His autonomous ultra instinct registered the threat, calculated the vector, and initiated the dodge. Whis shifted his torso to the left, a movement designed to let Vegeta's punch sail harmlessly past, leaving the Saiyan open for a counter-tap to the neck. It was the same move he had used 1,000 times. It was perfect. But the God Killer energy did not obey the rules of the angels. As Whis dodged, the red energy coating Vegeta's fist didn't just travel forward, it snagged the space around it. It created a gravity well of corruption. Whis felt a sudden, sickening lurch. His body, which should have been intangible to the attack, was pulled back into the trajectory. The angel's eyes went wide. For the first time in eons, the calculation was wrong. "He isn't attacking me," Whis' mind realized in a fraction of a nanosecond. "He is attacking the space I occupy." Whis raised his staff in a panic to block, abandoning the dodge. Vegeta's fist collided with the sacred staff. There was a sound like a gunshot in a library, sharp, shocking, and final. The staff, forged from materials older than the universe, shattered. Splinters of divine metal sprayed into the air like shrapnel. Vegeta's fist didn't slow down. It punched through the debris, carried by the momentum of pure, unadulterated hatred. The red light engulfed them both. The universe held its breath. For a single, agonizing second, the scene looked frozen, a tableau of impossible violence. Vegeta's fist was buried deep in the center of Whis' chest. The angel's robes, usually pristine and flowing, were bunched and torn around the point of impact. There was no blood at first, only light. A blinding, silver luminescence erupted from Whis' back where the force of the blow exited. It was the angel's essence, his very divinity, being forcibly ejected from his physical form. The shock wave of the impact finally caught up with reality, blasting outward in a silent, expanding ring that flattened the surrounding forest and turned the stone arena into dust. Beerus was thrown backward, tumbling across the ground, his eyes locked on the impossible sight. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the dirt on his face, ignoring the ringing in his ears. Whis. The destroyer screamed, a sound of raw, panicked denial. Vegeta didn't move. He stood anchored, his fist still buried in the angel. The red energy of the God Killer form was not just hurting Whis, it was eating him. The crimson sparks jumped from Vegeta's arm to the angel's skin, burning black geometric patterns, anti-divine sigils onto the pale flesh. Whis looked down. His expression was not one of pain, but of profound confusion. He tried to speak, but his lungs were compromised. He tried to summon his staff, but only the broken shards lay on the ground. Lifeless. Whis choked. A trickle of glowing, silver fluid spilling from his lips. It wasn't blood, it was starlight. You broke the rule. Vegeta looked up. His eyes were fully consumed by the red glare, the pupils visible only as pinpricks of malice. His face was a mask of cold, terrifying satisfaction. "I am the rule," Vegeta whispered. With a wet, sickening tear, Vegeta yanked his arm back. Whis gasped, a sound like a vacuum seal breaking. The angel swayed. The halo around his neck, the symbol of his eternal station, began to flicker. It pulsed once bright, then dim, then bright again. Then nothing. The halo shattered into particles of light. Whis fell. He didn't float down. He crumpled. He hit the dirt with the heavy, finalized thud of a mortal body. Vegeta stood over him, his right arm coated in the silver blood of the angel. The red energy of the God Killer form swirled around him, purring, sated by the taste of high divinity. Beerus stood 10 meters away, frozen. His hands hovered in the air, trembling. His mind, a mind that had seen civilizations rise and fall, stars born and die, could not process the data. An angel could not die. They were the constants. They were the referees. You could not kill the referee, but the referee was lying in the dirt, staring unblinkingly at the purple sky. "Vegeta," Beerus whispered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. Vegeta turned. He didn't rush. He didn't attack. He simply pivoted on his heel to face the god of destruction. The red aura flared, casting long, dancing shadows across the ruined landscape. "He told me I would never touch the sky," Vegeta said, his voice echoing with a demonic distortion. He raised his blood-stained fist, inspecting it. "So I brought the sky down to me." He looked at Beerus, and for the first time in history, the god of destruction felt the cold, creeping sensation of being prey. "Are you next, destroyer?" The silence that followed the fall of the angel was louder than the scream of a dying star. Beerus stood amidst the ruins of his garden, his boots sinking into the gray ash that was once lush grass. His eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on the body of the being who had been his teacher, his attendant, and his only true companion for 75 million years. Whis looked small. That was the thought that broke Beerus' mind. Without the halo, without the ethereal drift of his movements, without the smug aura of invincibility, Whis was just a body, a collection of matter that had ceased to function. The silver blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the dirt, glowing softly like spilled moonlight before dimming into a dull, leaden gray. "Whis," Beerus whispered. It was a question asked by a child who dropped a toy. There was no answer. There would never be an answer again. Vegeta stood 10 paces away, watching the destroyer. The Saiyan's chest heaved. The red currents of the God Killer energy coiled around his limbs like snakes. He didn't look triumphant. He looked heavy. The act of killing an angel had not brought him joy. It had simply removed an obstacle. It was a heavy stone moved from a path. "Get up," Beerus commanded, his voice trembling. He wasn't talking to Vegeta. He was talking to the corpse. "Get up, Whis. Stop playing." The oracle fish said nothing about this. "This isn't in the prophecy. Get up." Vegeta wiped the silver blood from his knuckles onto his ruined armor. "He can't hear you, destroyer," Vegeta said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the ground. "The ceiling is broken. The sky has fallen." Beerus' head snapped up. The trembling in his hand stopped. The shock that had frozen his heart instantly flash-boiled into a rage so pure, so concentrated, that the air around him ignited. "You!" Beerus snarled. His eyes, usually lazy and golden, turned entirely purple. "You filth! You ungrateful, primitive, mortal filth!" The ground beneath Beerus exploded. A pillar of Hakai energy, the violet light of absolute erasure, erupted into the sky, tearing the clouds apart. The pressure was immense. It was the full, unbridled power of a god of destruction who had nothing left to lose. "I gave you food," Beerus screamed, his voice distorting into a demonic roar. "I gave you a home. I gave you the secrets of the gods. And this is how you repay me." Beerus raised his hand, palm facing Vegeta. The energy coalesced into a sphere of destruction the size of a moon, condensing down, darker and darker, until it was a singularity of pure void. "I will not just kill you," Beerus hissed, tears of rage streaming down his feline face. "I will erase your soul. I will erase your timeline. I will erase the memory of your name from the mind of Zeno himself. Hakai!" Beerus thrust his hand forward. The sphere of erasure launched. It didn't travel through space. It deleted space as it moved. It was the ultimate sanction. The end of all things. It was the technique that no mortal could survive. The power that kept the multiverse in check. Vegeta did not move. He did not dodge. He did not power up a beam to counter it. He simply watched the end of the world coming toward him. The sphere of destruction struck Vegeta dead center. For a moment, the world was painted in absolute violet. The roar of the energy was deafening, a sonic scream that scoured the surface of the planet, stripping away the bedrock. Beerus held his hand extended, pouring every ounce of his millions of years of divinity into the technique. He was trying to push Vegeta out of existence, to scrub him from the cosmic record like a stain on a window pane. "Vanish!" Beerus screamed, his voice cracking. "Disappear!" But the stain did not scrub away. Inside the roaring inferno of purple light, a shadow remained. It was stubborn, it was dense, and it was growing. Beerus' eyes widened. The sphere of Hakai, usually a smooth, perfect orb of deletion, began to distort. It bulged outward, its surface rippling like a disturbed pond. Black veins, the same corruption that had killed Whis, began to spread across the surface of the destroyer's energy. Then, with a sound like shattering glass, the Hakai broke. It didn't explode, it shattered. The sphere of absolute destruction cracked into 1,000 shards of harmless purple light, raining down around Vegeta like confetti. Vegeta stood exactly where he had been. He hadn't moved a millimeter. His hand was raised, his palm open. He had caught the Hakai. He had caught the concept of erasure and crushed it in his grip. Smoke curled from his fingertips, red, oily smoke. How? Beerus stepped back, his heel hitting a rock. He stumbled, catching himself. That is the power of a god of destruction. That is the ultimate law. You cannot simply say no to it. Vegeta lowered his hand. The red aura around him calmed, settling onto his skin like a suit of blood-colored armor. He walked forward, his boots crunching on the shards of solidified divine energy. Your destruction relies on the laws of this multiverse, Vegeta said. His voice was no longer shouting. It was a terrifying, conversational tone. It relies on the target accepting that it can be destroyed. It requires permission from reality. Vegeta stopped 5 feet from the god. He looked down at Beerus. The height difference was negligible, but in that moment, Vegeta seemed to tower over the heavens. My power. Vegeta continued, tapping his own chest where the jagged red scar of the God Killer energy pulsed. Does not ask for permission. It does not recognize your authority to delete me. I am not part of your system anymore, Beerus. I am the glitch that crashes it. Beerus looked at his own hands. They were trembling uncontrollably. For the first time in his life, he felt naked. Without the absolute threat of the Hakai, without the safety net of Whis, what was he? Just a cat in a collar. You killed him, Beerus whispered, the rage draining away, replaced by a hollow, freezing dread. You actually killed him. He stood in the way, Vegeta said simply. He was the ceiling. I broke through. The Grand Priest. Beerus looked up, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear. Do you have any idea what you've done? The angels are connected. The Grand Priest knows. He will come, and he will unmake everything. Vegeta didn't flinch. He didn't look at the sky with fear. He looked at it with hunger. Let him come, Vegeta said. He walked past Beerus. He didn't strike the destroyer. He didn't finish him off. To kill Beerus now would be a mercy, and Vegeta was not in a merciful mood. He wanted the god to live. He wanted the god to stand in the wreckage of his garden, next to the corpse of his teacher, and realize that he was no longer the apex predator. Vegeta walked to a large, flat rock that overlooked the ruin of the temple. He sat down, resting his elbows on his knees, staring out into the stars. Behind him, Beerus fell to his knees. The god of destruction, the being who made universes tremble with a sneeze, buried his face in his hands and let out a sound that was not a roar but a sob. The hierarchy was gone, the order was broken, and on the rock, bathed in the red glow of his heresy, the God Killer waited for the true war to begin. The death of an angel is not a biological event, it is a structural failure of the cosmos. When a star dies, it explodes. When a galaxy dies, it fades. But when an angel dies, the universe does not scream, it stutters. Across the 12 universes, the fabric of reality experienced a microscopic, undetectable hiccup. In Universe 6, Vados paused mid-sentence, a teacup rattling against its saucer for no explainable reason. In the Null Realm, the Grand Priest stopped walking. The infinite gears that turned behind his eyes ground to a halt for a fraction of a second. The great staff, the axis upon which divine law rotated, emitted a single, dissonant tone, a low, mournful note that sounded like a cello string snapping in an empty auditorium. Back on the ruin of the Destroyer's planet, the silence was heavy enough to crush bone. Beerus remained on his knees. He was no longer the god of destruction. He was a mourner. His hands, usually instruments of absolute erasure, were trembling as he reached out toward the fading particles of light that had once been Whis. He tried to scoop them up, to hold the essence of his teacher, but the light passed through his fingers like smoke. "Don't go," Beerus whispered, his voice cracking. I haven't mastered it yet. You can't leave until I master it." It was a pathetic plea, stripped of all divine dignity. It was the sound of a creature realizing that for millions of years he had been a child holding a parent's hand, and now the hand was gone. Vegeta watched from his perch on the rock. He sat with one leg drawn up, his arm resting casually on his knee. The red aura of the God Killer still simmered around him, but it was quiet now, a predatory animal digesting a heavy meal. He did not mock Beerus. He did not gloat. To mock the destroyer would be to acknowledge him as an equal, and Vegeta had moved beyond equality. "He is not gone, Beerus," Vegeta said, his voice cutting through the thick, dead air. "He has simply returned to the source. The system reclaims its own." Beerus slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, the purple iris dull and lifeless. He looked at Vegeta with a mixture of hatred and profound confusion. "What are you?" Beerus asked. The question wasn't rhetorical. He genuinely did not recognize the being sitting on the rock. The key signature was wrong. The soul was wrong. You aren't a Saiyan anymore. You aren't a god. You are a void. Vegeta looked at his hand, tracing the black veins that pulsed beneath the skin. "I am the answer," he replied. "The answer to what?" "To the question you gods never thought to ask," Vegeta said, looking up at the darkening sky. "What happens when the tools you use to build your empires decide they don't want to be tools anymore?" Vegeta stood up. He walked to the edge of the rock, looking down at the destroyer. "For decades, I chased you," Vegeta continued, his voice low and mesmerizing. "I chased Kakarot. I chased the myths you dangled in front of us like carrots on a stick. Super Saiyan God, Blue, Ultra Instinct, Ultra Ego. Every time I reached a peak, you were there, hovering above me, smiling that arrogant, benevolent smile. Good job, monkey. Now climb higher." Vegeta clenched his fist, and the air around it fractured. "I realized something in the forest, Beerus. The mountain has no top. You designed it that way. You keep us climbing so we never look down and realize we are standing on a pile of our own bones. We gave you purpose." Beerus shouted, struggling to his feet, though he swayed unsteadily. "We gave you order. Without us, the universe is chaos. Then let it be chaos," Vegeta said, his eyes glowing with the terrible, beautiful red of the abyss. "At least chaos is honest. Order is just a lie told by the strong to keep the weak on their knees." Beerus stared at him, paralyzing horror washing over him. He realized, with a jolt of cold clarity, that Vegeta wasn't insane. He was hypersane. He had seen the machinery of the multiverse, the Xenos, the angels, the arbitrary erasure of timelines, and he had decided to break the machine. "The Grand Priest is coming," Beerus whispered, the name carrying the weight of a death sentence. "You can't fight him, Vegeta. You can't fight the Father of Angels. He will unmake you. He will unmake all of us." Vegeta smiled. It wasn't the manic grin of the Prince of Saiyans. It was a calm, serene smile, the smile of a man who had already accepted his fate. "I know," Vegeta said. "You know," Beerus repeated, his voice barely a whisper against the rising wind. "You know he is coming, and yet you sit here, you don't run? You don't try to hide in the cracks of the timelines." Vegeta scoffed, a short, sharp sound. "Hide? From the Grand Priest? There are no cracks deep enough, Beerus. You know that better than I." Vegeta turned back to the horizon. The sky, once a canvas of swirling purple nebulas, was beginning to change. The color was draining out of the cosmos. The stars weren't flickering out, they were being bleached. A terrifying, sterile whiteness was bleeding into the edges of the atmosphere, consuming the dark, consuming the light, consuming the very concept of color. It was the arrival of the Absolute. I am not waiting to fight him expecting to win, Vegeta said softly. I am not a fool. I know what the Grand Priest is. He is the writer of the story, and I am just a character who refused to read his lines. Then why? Beerus pleaded, stepping forward, his hands shaking. Why do this? Why kill Whis if it only leads to erasure? What was the point of all this pain? Vegeta looked over his shoulder, his eyes, burning with the crimson intensity of the God Killer, met Beerus' terrified gaze. To prove that it could be done, Vegeta said. The ground began to vibrate a low harmonic hum that rattled the teeth. The white light in the sky grew brighter, forming a perfect, geometric circle directly above the planet. It wasn't a portal, it was an eye. For eons, you gods have sat in your temples, secure in your immortality. Vegeta continued, his voice rising over the hum. You thought you were the ceiling, you thought mortals were mud, you played with our lives like pieces on a board. Vegeta stood up fully, turning his body toward the descending light. He flared his aura. The jagged, red energy erupted around him, a defiant bloodstain against the encroaching white purity of the Grand Priest's arrival. I did not kill Whis because I hated him, Vegeta roared, addressing the sky. I killed him to show you that you can bleed. I killed him so that every god in every universe, every angel, every Kai, will know that there is no such thing as an untouchable throne. The circle of light descended. A silhouette appeared within it, small, childlike, and terrifyingly calm. The pressure that landed on the planet was heavier than a black hole. It was the weight of authority. Beerus fell flat on his face, forced down by the mere proximity of the Grand Priest. He couldn't lift his head, he couldn't breathe. But Vegeta stood, his bones creaked, his muscles tore. The red veins on his neck bulged until they threatened to burst. The God Killer energy screamed, fighting the pressure, reinforcing his structure, turning his will into a physical pillar that refused to bend. Vegeta looked up at the silhouette, descending from the heavens. He didn't flinch, he didn't blink. Look at me, Vegeta bellowed, his voice echoing across the dimensions. I am a Saiyan, I am a mortal, and I am standing. The silhouette stopped 100 feet above the ground. The Grand Priest hovered there, his expression unreadable, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked at the body of his fallen son. He looked at the broken destroyer. And then, he looked at Vegeta. There was no anger in the priest's eyes. There was only a cold, clinical curiosity, as if he were looking at a cancer cell that had suddenly learned to hold a sword. Vegeta grinned. Blood leaked from his eyes, from his nose, from his ears. The pressure was killing him, but he was dying on his feet. Do it, Vegeta whispered, the sound carried by the wind. Erase me. Unmake me. But you will never unmake this moment. You will never erase the fear that you felt when you realized one of us could kill one of you. Vegeta raised his fist, the fist that had slain an angel toward the Creator. The ceiling is broken. The Grand Priest raised a single finger. The white light intensified, blinding, all-consuming. The world dissolved into silence. But in that final microsecond, before the erasure took him, Vegeta did not close his eyes. He kept them open, burning red, staring into the abyss until the abyss was forced to blink. The screen fades to white.